This.
Take a look.
Did we do that?
We did not.
Yeah. Oh, that nice. No worries, no worries. I'm so sorry about John. We said hi.
Well,
I forgot.
I will start in just 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Just let people come in.
Yeah, they haven't started bringing the xylophone, so no one knows.
Okay.
Yeah.
How can I
Yeah.
sit here? We're excited for it.
What?
Oh, I think they go to, you know, when it starts, I'm sure. It's like a gentle, like Pavlovian response. Like,
Lovely, actually.
perhaps they should go now.
It's a nice calming way of doing it.
I'm.
Oh, it's good as hell. When I saw this slide,
Thank
it's
you.
like, so,
Yes.
what?
Where is that? She'll hold the mic. She'll say the mic.
She'll kind of bring it around if anyone has a question.
Oh, okay, so O&M, there's, this right here, and then is a mic.
Yeah,
So that
This-
was.
this one is for the,
They water, like,
people will still be able to hear online if they just get.
Oh, really?
Graphics, so,
and
yeah.
one of their main.
Oh, okay, so you don't actually need to pass to the pass.
And I forgot this is in this room.
The owl.
Yeah.
Okay, this
This
is.
right here, yes.
Okay, so we're good.
And probably the second or third case study, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man, we've got a hard act. I think they should done this. Yeah, you're probably second now.
Two. Yeah, so we go. And we get no one. Yeah.
Oh, I don't push it in there.
Yeah. I think that's here.
Wow.
Look at this down. I agree. I think that's.
And then you're going to come back to your seats. And then we'll do Q&A from your seats. And then. You guys all met?
Yeah, we all met.
Easy crowd.
Yeah. Everyone's really your friends. As always, in this Canada Water Conference.
Yes. And there's. Well, we don't have just in time. It's 10. There's been a lot of conversations as well.
That's good to know.
But they tend to be. Like, domestic situation and their relevance internationally. So at first glance, California is not that, but we'll have that, you're gonna show us how it is.
Yeah, our frameworks are pretty different and
That's okay.
will definitely, I think, have some thoughts.
Don't trip.
Domestic experience we were talking about yesterday was West Virginia. But this was, excuse me, was not rural Appalachia. And now, now you have wells and basic access to water.
People will be surprised at the amount of issues we have even in the state.
Yeah.
It's such a large geography to begin with, but creating one system wouldn't work, so that's like five.
That's the case. Just, they don't think about that in California.
Oh, maybe I should emphasize that. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
So think about if the audience is a little more international oriented, a little more small scale and based on
they have 7 miles. The 27 million. And yeah, okay. Do you know about the state water project?
Well, my father worked for the Metropolitan Water District.
That's okay. Yeah, so the added infrastructure is probably one of the most important infrastructure, right? But it's.
Yep. And we morning, everyone. We're gonna get started here. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope we've got some coffee and a little bit of breakfast. Today, we have a wonderful panel, and let's get to it. Our title is Leveraging Innovation for Water Security, Exploring Cutting Edge Technologies in Water Resource Management. My name is David Spera. I'm a managing director at Deloitte. I serve our bilateral and multilateral donor clients as the head of our climate practice, which includes climate, energy, and water. And it's certainly my pleasure to be at UNC today and in front of all of you. And thank you for taking the time to come here. I'm joined today by colleagues, not only with Deloitte Consulting, but with University of Colorado Boulder. We'll call them CU Boulder. And that includes Abby Paisel, Sylvia Gottlieb, John Eklu, and Fatma Kuruglu, graduate students from CU Boulder. Thank you so much for joining us today and being with us. I want to just do a little shout out to Deloitte's relationship with CU Boulder. We have a climate innovation collaboratory that is focused on that we've put in place, I think, with CU Boulder for between 1 to 2 years now. We're really excited about it. We're doing work both in the US and overseas on our development programs jointly. And it's really focused on translating some of the cutting edge climate research that comes out of CU Boulder and turning it into meaningful climate solutions in climate and water and other key technical areas, particularly focused on solutions around drought mitigation and water resource management, which we'll discuss today. Really quickly through our agenda, I know we got a bit of a late start. I want to thank you for choosing this panel. You could be at other panels, I know, so thank you. We'll make it worth your while. We're going to focus on innovative technology and tools, and we're going to have a number of short case study presentations covering some of our work separately and together with CU Boulder, both overseas and domestically. And then we'll have a small Q&A session with the panelists where you guys can ask any question under the sun, just not to me. And then we'll actually try to do some breakouts. We're going to do some breakouts and have some hopefully good discussion where you guys can. One of the things we thought we'd do in our breakouts is just to think that all of the programs that we're describing are at early stages of implementation. So we're gonna use the breakouts as an opportunity to crowdsource some ideas on technologies or preempting some of the challenges that we often face in introducing technology. So we're gonna crowdsource, and we're counting on you to contribute to our programs. So thank you in advance for that. Just a couple quick. So just focusing on the challenge around water security. What it says right here, by 2050, nearly 5.7 people may face water scarcity for at least 1 month. 1 month per year. This is according to the UN. We have every reason to believe it. Water scarcity threatens the well-being of communities, ecosystems, and global stability. So it's no small matter. And addressing this challenge is, as we all know, we're here this week, is vital for sustainable development. And of course, the protection of the environment is an integral part of this as well. Couple key impacts. So water security ensures the reliable availability and accessibility of clean and safe water resources for all, not just in defining water security. It encompasses not only the management and sustainability, it encompasses the management and sustainability of water sources to meet current and future needs. Faced with increased frequency of drought, unpredictable precipitation, growing population and economic demands, and aging infrastructure, water managers, whether at the small scale or community or small scale and even in urban infrastructure settings, struggle to ensure water security. So everyone, throughout the sector is dealing with water security, either directly on a day-to-day basis or indirectly. The significance of water security is emphasized by its link to safeguarding public health, ensuring food and economic security, and advancing global sustainability. So absent water security, we all, the consequences are tremendous. Another reason why water and health are together here at this conference. And of course, failing to address water. Well, let me just move on. I just want to, maybe the big important takeaway of this slide is water security is increasing in urgency because of growing water scarcity and climate change, which is just further compounding the challenges around water security. And of course, water scarcity is disproportionately impacting vulnerable populations, their food security, their health, and economic stability. So an equitable approach also needs to be integrated to any discussions and solutions around water security. And then in many parts of the world, aging infrastructure further compounds some of the challenges. We're dealing in places where we have an absence of infrastructure, and we're working in places where we have aging infrastructure or infrastructure that's no longer appropriate for the circumstances. Yeah, one more introductory slide. Just looking at technology real quickly and addressing, technology can and does play a pivotal role in addressing this complex challenge. We have advanced solutions like radar sensors, IoT, GIS, and smart water management systems that are helping to alleviate water scarcity, and we'll talk about some of those today. We have innovative data and analytics for better predictive ability, management of water resources, and a more complex understanding of water availability and water quality. Technology can play a role in modernizing aging infrastructure and asset management, and many other issues related to assets. Can technology can address the efficiency and resilience of infrastructure. And lastly, digitizing water infrastructure can allow for real-time monitoring and control and more efficient use. And these are all sort of critical ways that we see technology supporting issues around water scarcity. And we'll talk about just some of those today. So with that, I'd like to move on with our case studies and ask Abby Pizell to come to the screen. And Abby, when you're done, would you introduce the next person? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you again, as David said, for having us today. I think this is such an important topic, and the role that technology is going to play in addressing global water security is going to be huge and vast. One of the first case study we're going to discuss is in Armenia. It's work that Deloitte is doing actively. For those of you who don't know where Armenia is, it's a small landlocked country between Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Iran. And one of the really interesting things about Armenia is that it's both a headwater state and receives water downstream from other countries, which makes it a really interesting dynamic in managing water resources. And then within this case study, we're going to look at how Armenia is currently monitoring their water supply and availability from lakes, rivers, streams, what solutions that technology can pose to better and more effectively monitor water availability and manage supplies. So just quickly setting the stage, there are a couple of key water security areas that are very prevalent in Armenia. The first being that it's a pretty arid and dry climate, which combined with the effects of climate change, of course, means they're pretty water scarce, particularly, at the end of the growing season when there's been little rainfall before the snow comes back, which is causing some concerns about understanding how much water is available and how to allocate effectively to different users. Armenia also is one of their biggest economic drivers is agriculture. And so being an arid climate combined with heavy water use from agriculture, particularly dairy farms and fish farms, that just also adds to some of the water security questions raised. There are some considerations for contamination from those agriculture and industry uses as well. And then the last thing is aging infrastructure. I think we see that across the board in a lot of different countries, both developed and developing. But in Armenia, some of the factors that contribute to the aging infrastructure is their historical context. So the Soviet legacy, the change in kind of the structure of the government over the last 20, 30 years, those have all contributed to water security in Armenia. What we focus on is the water monitoring, as I mentioned. So throughout Armenia, there's various water monitoring posts. They measure the water flow and help us understand how much water is running through different water bodies. So like one of the biggest one is Lake Savan, where they have and store critical water resources. And so in a lot of cases, the water monitoring posts are outdated for software reasons. Maybe they don't have a way to integrate the data collected. Maybe they don't have a hardware to measure. So they might have the old Veritushka water flow meters where you put them in the river and you're testing points in time. In some cases, they have to manually go to the water site and get the data and record it manually in a logbook and then go transfer that to an Excel-based system and upload it. So as you can imagine, that just creates a lot of scenarios where there's error in the data. They're not getting a full and comprehensive picture of the water availability. And then if we look at, we're starting with a situation where it's unclear how much water we have, and then trying to translate that to how do we allocate the water? How do we make sure there's enough for ecosystem services? How do we make sure there's enough for agriculture, which is driving the economy? How do we make sure there's enough for households? So within our program in Armenia, that is what we will be doing. We will be helping the government of Armenia and their water monitoring entities improve and use technology to really get a more comprehensive picture of water availability. As you can see here, water monitoring really affects water security of the country. And with that, I'll pass it over to Fatma to dive into some of our case study, real world, what's going on.
So as Abby mentioned, Lake Savan is the key water resource in Armenia because it brings water to the main agricultural zone, Ararat Valley. And the current measurement of the water level is done physically there, and it makes it prone to the human error and makes it more difficult to share this critical data with like different stakeholders. So our team at CU visited Armenia in May 2023 and installed ultrasonic water level sensors and satellite connected gateways, as you can see on the picture, to improve the performance of the water monitoring and the accuracy. And then they also made an assessment and compared the data obtained from this technology to the current technology's data. And as you can see at this correspondence map, it yielded like an R-square value of like 99%, which indicates nearly perfect alignment with the current data. So that's why a promising and low cost upgrade technology, both in this monitoring post and also the other critical water monitoring points in Armenia. So for the second case study, John is coming. Let me see.
Hi everyone. Once again, my name is John Iklu. I'm a PhD student at CU Boulder, and I'm with the Mortensen Center there. So for this case study, we'll be looking at how enhanced data collection can improve access to climate financing and in turn improve water security. And the case that we'll be looking at is some work we did in Rwanda. And so just to set the stage and give a background to the challenge, we'll all agree with the statement that improved or more water infrastructure leads to improved access to, leads to improved water security. But that statement is only true if the water infrastructure still works. Because you can have water infrastructure, but if it doesn't work, you still have challenges with water security. And this picture is a case in point. It's a very common scene in many international development contexts. It's a broken down borehole, and it illustrates the fact that you can have infrastructure, but then if the infrastructure is not working, communities will still have challenges with water security. And one of the reasons why we have broken infrastructure is that historically, investments in water security have focused on capital expenditure, providing the infrastructure, and there's been little investment into providing funds for O&M. And the assumption is that at the community levels, the households or communities can raise funds through tariffs alone. But that assumption has proven to be false. A recent analysis of water utilities, their life cycle costs show that in high, middle, and low income settings, people are not paying for the full cost of water. Water is subsidized. And so relying on tariffs alone to fund O&M doesn't cut it. So there's an O&M funding gap. And this gap, the costs are actually growing. As we are trying to achieve the SDGs, the World Bank estimates that the O&M costs are going to increase from about 4 billion a year, that's in 2015, to over 30 billion a year by 2030. And so funds are needed for O&M. Climate financing can help bridge this gap. How can climate financing help? For example, a project or a program that distributes water filters as an alternative to boiling water in a bid to improve the climate resilience of households can access climate financing, in particular carbon credits. And those carbon credits can help solve the O&M challenge. The thing is that a lot of the data that is used to obtain these credits are often not credible. The traditional monitoring, reporting, and verification processes are time intensive, they're expensive, and they're manual. And because they are manual, as some of my colleagues mentioned, they are prone to human error and manipulation. And that's a big challenge. But digital technologies, on the other hand, can help provide better, accurate data, and they can they can measure data remotely, and they can also measure data in real time. And that's really important in accessing climate financing. And so a case in point is what we did in Rwanda. In Rwanda, as part of a large-scale water filter program, sensors were put in the water filters to measure the adoption rates of the water filters. Basically, what the sensors were doing was measuring the fill rates and empty rates of those water filters to see if people were using them. And this data was compared to household surveys. And in household surveys, the data was gotten from households reporting their usage rates. And this was compared with the sensor data. What it showed was that households tend to exaggerate their usage rates and indicates that data from sensors are more accurate. And so in summary, what we're trying to do is help solve this operation and maintenance gap. And more credible data can help attract more climate financing to the water sector. I would like to say that this is still like ongoing research. There's a lot of research going on in the climate financing space, and we're actually writing a report on how to leverage high integrity carbon credits for water resilient water systems. Resilient water systems, yeah. And so if there's anyone in the room who has experience in this area and would like to talk to us after the side event, we'll welcome you. We're conducting interviews at the moment. And so if you would like to be part of that, you can see us after the side event. With this, I'll transition to the next case study. And this is what we are doing in the Horn of Africa. It's using groundwater management for adapting to increasing drought. And once again, to set the scene here, in the Horn of Africa, the problem is that droughts are intensifying, and especially in the recent decades. They are getting worse and worse. And when we talk about droughts, there are different phases to droughts. So it usually starts with natural variability, but compounded with climate change. And that tends to result in precipitation deficits. And if these deficits persist, it leads to hydrological drought. And hydrological drought usually manifests in the sense that you have low soil moisture, you have low water flow. And this also can cascade into an agricultural drought, and finally leads to an economic drought. And so there's that whole process where the water security is affecting health and livelihoods of people. The good thing is that in the Horn of Africa, there's groundwater, and the groundwater there is fairly stable. And so groundwater can help mitigate the challenges of drought in that area. But then there are also challenges with the groundwater. Some of the challenges are there's limited functionality of the groundwater infrastructure, there's inconsistent operation and maintenance, and there's lack of sufficient financing for water service delivery. And that's where technology comes in. So in the Horn of Africa, we have installed sensors on boreholes. And what the sensors are doing is measuring the usage of those boreholes. And the data from that we are getting from those sensors can help us know when a borehole is broken down or help us predict when a borehole might break down. Because these sensors are measuring the usage rate. And if you notice that there are particular areas that are being used more, there's a likelihood that those boreholes might break down. And one thing to know about this context is that in some places, there's no cellular network. And so if a borehole breaks down, you can't just like pick up a phone and call and be like, a borehole is broken down. People go around and monitor these boreholes, and that's really not efficient. But with the data we are getting from these sensors, operation and maintenance teams can know exactly what borehole isn't working and go directly to those boreholes and fix them. In addition, with the data from the boreholes and in combination with other climate data, we can predict when a borehole is likely to break down. And if we can predict that, the teams can do two things. One, they can go and do preventive maintenance because they know a borehole is about to break down, and that's a lot cheaper than fix it when it actually breaks down. And the second one is that if they know it's about to break down, they can prepare themselves so that when it actually does break down, they can repair it. So those are 2 case studies, and that's how we're using data to improve water security. And I'll now hand over to Sophia. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about water in California. Before I go there, I just want to kind of set the foundation real quick that water in the United States is not centrally managed. It's a huge country. And so each state manages their water separately. Okay, sometimes they work together, usually not very well. And so I'll talk a little bit about California and technological challenges there, specifically around systems management for water rights. All right. So first, I'm going to set a little bit more of the scene. California's water resources are under tremendous pressure. We talked a little bit about increasing drought conditions. So in California, you may have heard, or maybe not, right? The world doesn't revolve around California, much to the chagrin of California. So the temperature and the climate is really changing and shifting. We go from severe drought and something called aridification, which means drought that is so severe that conditions are deteriorating very quickly, and even years of surplus water are not going to mitigate them, to complete flooding. And how do you go from a drought one year to flooding the next year? Can't you just tuck the water away somewhere and store it? It's not that simple. We wish it was. But these challenges are really threatening the availability and reliability of that water. So managing the water effectively becomes even more important. You have to know what water there is, who holds the water rights, and how it can be allocated and distributed. Water rights are very, very complicated in California. Water rights were based on riparian law, which essentially means if you buy land, the water that's available there is yours to take. But also there was a gold rush in California in the late 1800s. And what that meant was people were moving water so they could mine. And when they were mining and moving that water, they created separate land rights and water rights. And so there's this very complex system that just came by organically. It wasn't super thoughtful. So how do you manage water rights when there's such disparate ways of looking at it? All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges of integrated water, or actually, I didn't skip slide, sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges of lack of data, integrated data. So there's a funny story actually in California, all water rights were on paper. So you have these papers with your water rights, awesome, right? Everybody loves paper, but then it started to really accumulate. It was all stored in a building somewhere in Sacramento. And suddenly we found that floor was sinking. It was going down to the other floors because there was so much paper. As much as we love paper, it's not very efficient. It's also not very economical. It also creates a huge administrative burden to shift through papers. And then there's major discrepancies in right folders. And so one of the things that they do in California is, okay, this piece of paper is the day before or a year before, this takes precedence. Wouldn't it be great if there was one magical way of just being able to search for something and see, hey, what's the water right, instead of digging through papers and creating more trust with your population? That's exactly what California is thinking. We'll go into that a little bit more before, or I'll pause here on that while I go into some other issues. So as I mentioned, complex web of water rights, and a major challenge here is efficient and equitable distribution of water is becoming more increasingly difficult. There's a lack of integrated water use data as well. There's quality control and rigid systems that don't easily connect to other data systems. So when you do have systems in place, you're not talking to each other. The data inputs do not match enough for you to be able to search them, to be able to find things. You have to call somebody and manually shift through things. It takes a lot of time. And when you're dealing with water and type of agriculture, time is imperative. Right? Okay, let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the solution that we're putting together. All right, so I talked a little bit about that challenge with water rights and finding it, all those papers on that floor that was thinking that they had to reinforce in Sacramento. So by creating a system, an integrated system, create customer management, people call you asking about their water rights, you can respond immediately. You can have transparency in the process. Data standardization, making it easy to make that data searchable and immediate, so you can make decisions as they are needed. Geospatial data as well. So one of the great things about California is there's the Sierra Nevadas. They get a lot of snowpack. And as many of you may already know, snowpack equals water, especially in the springtime when there's water runoff. It helps replete our system. And they don't always have an efficient way of measuring that. But if you know what your snowpack is, if you know you have a lighter snowpack, you know that come spring, you're going to have less water rushing through. You're going to have less water availability. So you can start limiting allocation early to prevent severe outages and shortages. Oh, sorry, I touched the screen. All right, so then there's the document digitization piece. Having a whole floor back in a building, not having papers there, and removing the inconsistency in data that's available. So major outcomes is efficient data control, really making sure that there's real-time data for monitoring and analyzing, and then proactively making decisions. If I'm in a flood year and the next year is a drought year, I may have saved up my stores of water as much as I can, but that drought year, I still have to be very efficient because you don't know if that year is going to go on for 1 year, 2 years, a decade, and that often happens. All right, so adaptability and scalability. When you create a system and things are complex and changing all the time, you can be agile, you can be fast, you can move quickly and make effective decisions. And then having a single location for the water rights. We all know that centralizing information can simplify what needs to happen, how it needs to happen. It also creates trust. If you are a water rights holder and you don't know where your paper sits and you're trying to rely on somebody to find it, I'd be a little bit skeptical. I'm sure you would too. They're very expensive. But water is a human right. And it's really important for us to be able to organize our information and data to make sure that as we progress in this unsteady climate situation and as water becomes less available and more scarce, that we're able to manage that efficiently and effectively for our population. All right, thank you. I think we'll go to the Q&A session.
Well, I think we have time for about 15 minutes of questions
Exactly.
on any of the case studies. You don't need a microphone, but just maybe raise your hand and direct how you'd like. Do you want to call on people? Maybe introduce yourself. I think that would be helpful for the audience.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sri from Millennium Water Alliance. I have two questions. The first one in connection to climate finance. Is the water sector eligible for climate finance? And what do you comment on the credibility of data and the ability and fulfillment of the requirement that in the global standards and protocols, the required protocols to make the water sector eligible for climate. The second one is supported monitoring of local service. How do you see the local capacity, sustainability, ownership of the center supported monitoring of the local service? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that first one is to you, John. Is the second question to you?
Wants to clarify.
Okay.
Okay, so for the first question,
Can you move the mic to John?
okay, yeah.
We might need to turn it on.
So I believe the question is the water sector eligible for climate financing? And then how can you get that financing, or like what are the hurdles to get to that? And so first, yes, the climate sector is eligible for that financing. And over the past 2 weeks, I've actually been doing some digging. There are different methodologies that define how you can claim carbon credits or climate financing. And the very big one is the gold standard methodology. And so that would be like a first place to look if you're looking to get climate finance. And they have clear laid out procedures on how a project or an activity you're doing can get climate financing. And I did a search, and I just like searched water in their registry, and I got to about 1,000 projects. So people are doing a lot of stuff out there. But yeah, there's still research going on to it. So I'll recommend that you look at the gold standard. There are other methodologies, but the gold standard will be one I'll say look at.
John, let me just say something. So on that first question, I think CU Boulder has done a lot of research and done some pilot projects around climate financing and making it available for the water sector. It's fairly novel, and I think, but there are multiple examples, and I think it's becoming increasingly common, and working out the methodologies is what a number of different actors are doing right now.
One other thing to add, just a small plug, USAID actually has a tool, Deloitte helped them develop, but it's to help utilities access climate finance. So you can plug inputs from your project into this tool, and it will flag like where you might have weaknesses relative to where climate financiers are looking for. And so then you can improve your project proposal based on the factors that climate financiers are looking for. Because yes, applying for and accessing climate finance is a slog. It is multiple year process. You have to have really good data on the climate impacts. So there is a tool that's kind of can help you get started based on your project and aligning it with climate finance parameters.
Where can one find that?
If you look up super climate finance toolkit, you'll find it.
Super, SUPER?
Yes, that tool is geared a little bit towards electric utilities, but a lot of the parameters are very still applicable in the water sector because utility management are, a little bit similar. And I think it would be a good starting place for people who just dabbling in climate finance. Anything else?
I think his second question on monitoring.
Yes, sir. Would you mind repeating your second question, please?
The sensor.
Yes.
One-time system. How do you see the local capacity, sustainability, ownership, related issues associated with this? The technology is fine.
I'll speak to Armenia and Fatma if you want to jump in, and then John, if you maybe have a small comment. So in Armenia, with the water monitoring sensors, they will be owned and maintained and operated by their central government level water monitoring agency, which does have disaggregated, regional arms. The program that we are working on implementing will do small training and capacity building for the agency on how to utilize the data. If the sensors, break, they'll have the skills to maintain them, or at least source where to get replacement parts fairly easily. So yes, we're building in different components related to making sure it's not just a one-time effort, it's a long-standing in Armenia going forward. Some like practical things, looking at the sensor has, warranties. So if it breaks in the first 5 years, they can go to the company and the company will come and replace it for them.
Local vendors.
And local vendors. We're using local Armenian vendors so that they have access to long-term. Fatma, John.
Yeah, maybe just to add a little to that. I think in the case of the Horn of Africa, the big thing is that this is informing the operation and maintenance teams. And so they're really invested in this because it's helping improve their work. And so there's ownership of it. Yes, but of course, as you mentioned, there are operation and maintenance costs.
No, a question? Or
I'm Michael from USA. This stage, we are more attracted to technology than real-time data collection based process management. Particularly for the hidden information in groundwater, because we don't really see it anyway. We particularly recommend like statewide-based groundwater when it comes to investigation than any time based on one your thoughts that when we investigate groundwater to reduce the uncertainty, how to really bridge the gap between use of technologies and real-time water management tools. Real-time investigation.
Okay, if I understand your question, it's when you say test, are you talking about water quality?
No, just digging the hole itself so that we can really see what is really happening there.
Okay,
We use a lot of thematic maps, remote sensing based,
yeah,
that will really, certainly it will solve some problems.
yeah,
However, it does not really show you what is really happening below the ground. However, when you dig the hole itself, you see it. So that's what we call a test way.
okay, okay, I think I understand. I think I'd like to say that a lot of these models that we are building are comparing the data, because the models are being built, and so they are comparing the data from these institute sensors to actual measurements, so that we can make sure the models that we are building are given similar information. And so test walls have a place. These is just like to build models that can make it more efficient, because having to drill a lot of test walls can be expensive and intensive. So we use actual like real measurements to help build these models. I hope that answers. Yeah.
any additional questions from the audience, or was in the back there?
Actually, bring the mic back to you.
Michael Sankey, York University. I'm just curious about digitizing water rights in California. You mentioned that it will build trust and transparency. How do you also deal with the perceived or real risk of cyber attack or other cybersecurity issues, even as simple as deleting certain people's records to benefit others?
And will you make it, see if it's on or something?
Close to your, yeah, okay. Thank you. So the question was around digitization of water rights and cybersecurity. That's an excellent question. Anytime you digitize anything, you have to be very aware of cybersecurity. Water being a life essential right and a need is going to be a target for terrorism or any type of security attacks. And so one of the things that you would want to do is redundancy in your system. You wouldn't just have one record that's housed in one place in your database. There is significant redundancy. There's security parameters set around access. And then there's evaluations that occur through randomized auditing to prevent any type of issues. Does that help answer? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize when you are thinking of digitizing your water records, you have to be very familiar with what kind of system you're using, the redundancies you create, and making sure you have backups available in different areas, right? So you don't want your backup systems in one place only. You'd want to create more redundancy to prevent any type of loss of information. And that would also be super helpful, right? Next question.
Also, just please raise your voice loud for everyone to hear.
Okay.
And introduce yourself as well.
On that issue, there was recently a Supreme Court case between Tennessee and Mississippi, and it dealt with water rights. And what I think you may end up doing is finding out there are a lot of people that think they own the water rights when their neighbor thinks they own the water rights. And I think you're going to end up with a really big mess. I know, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court and it was a major battle.
Right.
And
I'm not sure
Tennessee won.
digitization addresses that. That's a mess on paper and it's a mess
Yeah, yeah.
when you
The point
digitize it.
is the lawyers, it's not the digitalization. They don't care where it comes from as long as they get to make some money on it. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, right? Like the quality of your data will be significantly impacted based on what you have, right? So digitizing won't solve that, but cleaning up your data before you digitize it should be a first step. And of course, as you know, it's a very, very complex world.
No, I own those water rights. I'm sorry.
Fair enough.
So there you go.
Yeah, maybe.
Mind standing up? Yeah, sorry, Sarah, I'm not going on to talking about transparency. While California doesn't necessarily have as many like indigenous water rights as other states in the region, they obviously still have ties to that. However, generally, like indigenous populations don't have the same access to things like internet, technology, etc. How are you dealing with this idea of like community support, trust, etc., when you potentially are making these records harder to access, or rather less equitable to access, sometimes for the communities whose rights are already not being respected?
We can pull them.
That's an excellent question. Was everyone able to hear that? It's about water rights access for indigenous populations when you're digitizing. So in the United States, in California, New Mexico, Arizona, which is where I live, there are significant indigenous populations and other areas as well. And their rights have always been infringed upon and not respected. And so the point that was being made is, well, how does this make water rights equitable? Well, it captures them in a system so they can't be tucked away in paper somewhere else and kind of hidden, which has happened in the past. So it's all about one, recognizing the issues that are at hand, not trying to cover them up. And that is key. You do not want to cover up the issues that your community is facing. You want to digitize them so you can have that transparency and that clarity. And some of this gets solved through reporting, but another point that you brought up is, well, how do indigenous populations then access their rights? There are availabilities to call in. It's not just going through a system and being able to access it. And Governor Newsom in California has actually issued an executive order about any type of communications that need to happen for public awareness to make sure that indigenous populations are being thought of throughout the process. So if you create any type of strategy or strategic plan at an agency level in California, you have to go to the tribal nations and actually speak with the people and provide them with a forum to provide their updates. So it's an extremely complicated process, but a necessary one.
It's an excellent response.
Great, thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
That means everyone's ready for the breakout session next. So we're going to mix it up a bit now. We'll have sort of 4 breakout groups, each one around one of the 4 case studies that were discussed today. And I think, as John mentioned, a lot of this work that we presented is ongoing. So one major aspect of these case study breakouts is to have your critique, your comments, your questions in order to enhance our work. And maybe, as David said, crowdsource your expertise. So we're going to split, as I said, into 4 groups. Let's do kind of a counterclockwise. So here, number 1 is water resource monitoring in Armenia. And we'll have a set of questions we can discuss around that specific topic and country. 2 in the back is tech for recording for climate finance investors, the case of Rwanda, led by John. 3 in the back, groundwater monitoring in the Horn of Africa. And is Dennis going to help facilitate? Hey, Dennis, sorry, back corner. And then right here is digitized water rights, state of California. And we'll just take about 10 minutes for discussion and then come back together. Yeah.
Well, they're going to groups that want to go. I'm in some. Traveling.
Like, I'm almost here.
Venus here. I thought you were telling people, but you guys.
Here.
My name is Claire Shane, and I'm host of technology.
Yeah.
But I was a teacher because I was going about blockchain for other trading. And it was going to make sense of raise, business studies around cyber and security. It's exactly about the my understanding. Basically just analyze like a impenetrable idea. Okay, so please help me understand where that is useful, can it be?
I'm actually trying to see. I want to make sure you
Yeah.
I will, I'm not a blockchain expert, very clear, but there is like, immutable IDs that are attached, but a lot of the blockchain that's being developed is like trying to leverage that permanence in terms of like putting everything out there with these permanent IDs forever, which I would argue, I wouldn't say it's only opinion. That first off, anything you put there is often not great validation of it, it's just a consistency test. So it's like, is this accurate with the rest of what's going on through the processing? Not, is this actually accurate in the but then since it is largely immutable information, you don't necessarily have the ability to go back and say, oh, actually, it's a mistake. So like, you know, paper records, right? If you have dual filings, they show up as two valid filings because they're not duplicates. So you might be able to then, as a human being, see, oh, well, this one was put in first, but that doesn't solve this conflict of you have two rights claiming the same water entity. Also, I would argue it does not improve water security, if anything, like from a digital perspective and like cyber attacks, if anything, it's more vulnerable. Because
The rights are fixed.
they're fixed and they're largely visible. So you can like kind of hide them with the equivalent of like a digital curtain. But it's not hard to get behind said digital curtain. It's not secure in the ways that you can potentially secure other databases, et cetera. Because a lot of the blockchain technology is built off of this idea of being able to see every aspect of it. So I'm not saying it can never be implemented in this way, but I would argue it's not right.
I've got something that Lynn was about that happened to me personally. And it doesn't deal with water, but the concept is the same. And that concept deals with how ingenious a crook can be to get your property or your money. I bought some property in Orange, Texas, and I paid a note on it for a while, then I had enough cash and decided I was going to pay it off. And it turned out the person I bought it from didn't own it. It belonged to someone in Louisiana that was so far away that, and this person was supposed to be in charge of it, but they didn't own it. And the reason they got away with it in the beginning is because they had someone on the inside in the in the county clerk's office that just, when I went up to check the deed, to make sure they owned it, they had just put a deed in there that wasn't true. And I called them, and of course, I didn't have to pay anything or anything like that, but it was, and the same thing could happen here, and it doesn't have to happen the first time you're in there. You know, you may trade it all, not trade it all, you may move it all online. And then someday you get a crooked person that's in there and they just decide, no one can catch me and no one can prove it. And that's what these people thought. They got caught. So I see a lot of lawsuits and a lot of, and so paper doesn't work either. That's the point I was gonna make.
So nothing is gonna be perfect, and I think you guys bring up something awesome here. And something that I want to emphasize is when you're putting together a system, your data is only, your information, that system is only as good as the plan on it. So creating risk mitigation, doing risk assessment to your system, opportunities for your system is absolutely probably try to identify the lessons, right? You don't want to just go in and say, five records, I'm just gonna, no, you got, what are these five records? What are their purposes? Are there conflicts here? Or is there any upfront resolutioning? So in California, it's pretty unique where generally it's based by like first right. So if you had got procured the right first, you would have that right over anyone else that had gotten that right secondarily. So you are the first person who will have on your water rights. On your water rights come with all other rights. California's water rights are much more complex because of the way it originated, right? So you would probably have more of the retention law where you're based out of, where it's based on land. This is really based on, you can sell your water rights, so cheap my land. And so it's super complex. What happens, Texas does have a lot of the western states, especially those that touch the Colorado and
also right of capture. A right of capture, I can take, if you're next to me, I can take all your water just by pumping on my property.
do some diversions, yeah. If it's nefarious pumping, they will call you out there.
Yeah.
But it's a highly complex situation that I'm kind of putting together. Blockchain has its place. There is going to be no one thing that can solve it. Digitizing your water is going to solve your problem. It's a very, like we talked about earlier, you're still going to have conflicts in water rights. You're still going to need to resolve. It's all about digitization is a step in the right direction, as long as it's law. Like it's clear about it. You understand what the shortcomings are and create systems processes like governance around it for education, for making sure that you're not creating an inequitable situation. Yeah, and you feel automatically if you're extremely wealthy and get away with things. Well, you have to build that into the framework of your business, like, and the way that you create the process for our tables in the one.
In that way, it'll be, it can become very clear, like. Okay, you see that, and as Mark, we are next to run a lot of water in. Especially Colorado, that have their right, legislated in a way that's unique to Boulder, and they don't have the same restrictions going for ends them. But also, and so like, kind of protecting, when that information is more publicized, there's population is like unjust. Having their rights strong arm. But it's not illegal, but it's not, I would argue it's not just or equitable when not that that information is not already available, but having it more, I would assume, accessible as well as like, might create a greater. And so I was like wondering if there were institutions or other things being developed alongside this digitization, so that once it's available, that it's also already an operable body to address these concerns.
So.
There's safeguards that are being developed. There's something that's not like, okay,
And speaking to barriers for uptake and application of this technology too.
Yeah, it seriously complicates the situation, and transparency can make it that various actors come in and try to usurp people's rights. of those. And so how do you create the safeguards and policy is really big, right? And enforcement, so policy is one and enforcement is the other. So you can't just have a system in silos. You have to make sure it's fully adapted throughout the ecosystem system of activities that happen at that government level.
More about data redundancy and duplication, because I feel like in most cases, that's not considered a best practice, is to have like data sets, just everywhere, so I just.
You're absolutely right. You don't want the data to be duplicate, but you do want to have various data warehouses that are accessible to create redundancy and storage rather than like if a warehouse is like specifically. So as we all know, water is one of those infrastructure in particular where and so having your warehouse secret location and having them secured is going to be really important to make sure your data.
How are they both of the geographically spread out? Like I'm also worried about a natural disaster.
Yes, yeah.
Because like I did land development for like 4 months of this year, and one of the hard things with the city is like every single deed duplicated in my yard, because if the building burned down, if the building flooded, if the building like collapsed, that record was still gonna survive. And that would be the advantage of the physical record in my opinion.
That makes absolute sense, and having that type of consideration is gonna be really key. I don't have a great answer for you right now. California, it has significant fire issues, as you know. It is also a really large state, a lot of different geography. That's one of those things that's
For any technology, one of the questions was around sustainability and especially maybe the staff that was familiar with holding paper in the past. What is the kind of human capital aspect of shifting them to this digitized system?
I love this question. So they've all been great questions, but this one I think really speaks to, well, what about the people that manage this? How does that work? If you're taking work that, say, an under like represented population has been managing and taking care of, you suddenly pay it for them, are you retiring and what's happening? So there's a couple things happening in California right now. There's the aging workforce, they're calling it solar tsunami. At the state water project in California, which is much less standard for water in the world. That's what they call it, right? So their workforce understands and knows what they do, but a significant population is retiring. I believe almost all the executives will have retired within the next 5 years. So how do you train these people up? And so going back to your question about water rights, the folks that have been maintaining it, they're really good at remembering things. Well, that's one person. What's gonna happen to that one person? There's no redundancy to be able to say, hey, I have this system in mind, I know exactly where I'm gonna find it. Right? And so it helps with that redundancy, but it's also cross training. So as people age out of like managing the water, it's going to create an opportunity for new folks to come in and be able to come up to speed more with some of that knowledge management. But in other words, it's not requiring that you can't come on board with the digitalization effort. There's still people that totally understand what's been happening. Those people's jobs don't go away. They just kind of get reshifted instead of going into like a box and finding a piece of paper. That oftentimes the paper records will get damaged, which is really unfortunate. So what can that person do, right? Well, that person can help guide, you know, this is stupid because of this. And then what that does is it helps us think, oh, yeah, this person's right. We weren't thoughtful about it. You absolutely want and need folks that are not bought into digitalization, because they're gonna be your system.
I'm not in California has to work stringent environmental requirements. But generally the certificate of data sets is that require management servers at the bare minimum, or like licensing to like cloud-based. And we generally take a lot of it as well as like physical plans. So like, how are you guys planning to manage that? Especially considering like we have a number of buildings, etc.
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's all about, well, are there actually competition? And it's been deemed by seven office companies, they don't exactly have the color, not for you, but I can relate to the fact that personally, it is extremely expensive. It may not be for everyone. Worth it. What are the pros and cons? Weighing those pros and cons. What are your current challenges? Looking at them, understanding the situation, or the decision. It may be right for digitalization or digitalization in one place, but not another. At least not now. And the cost of things are gonna go down significantly, especially if they become more prevalent. So there are some barriers to entry. And so really evaluating, is my region one of those? Is it going to be helpful or more harmful? And how does it then impact the economy of the area that it's supposed to
Was this system developed in for the governor of California, or was it?
It's still being developed. It's kind of off the shelf, but it will need significant work. Just as the solution, like the problem as we talked about, right? It's not, we're still in the process of it. It's really complex. The other baseline. Yeah.
You can help.
So Deloitte is a consulting firm, very, right, so like there's a. And there's consulting. And consultants essentially have these really strong thoughts, evaluation methodologies that are actually validate them in a very formative, kind of way. Also, being able to be agile and tailoring it as a company that you go to, because then the company is coming really assess the business and find out what's really about and what current gaps are. And so that's what we primarily focus on, is looking at what are the gaps and what are potential improvements. So if we advise on paper where your gap is, or they'll create a solution for it, depending on if there's a flex. So right now. If I want to use technology and I found technology, we would really different kinds of what needs to use for.
Have you thought about the security of having things that mess up as they are right now as being a positive thing for security? No, seriously.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. So
Seriously, because it's very difficult for someone that doesn't know where a file is. And they have to spend an hour finding it as opposed to somebody like this, and they pull it up and then, oh, I think that person died. I want to see if I can, I'll just put my name in where their name is. You know?
And it's not like that hasn't happened before.
Oh,
Water rights are very extremely.
Or rights and techniques are like that.
Yeah, they are like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We thought we owned some more. And then we found out we didn't.
Yeah.
So,
You're absolutely right. That is really an excellent. So we have to do the conditions.
That will wrap up and let everyone enter into the coffee break early, but I'll just say, Sophia, would you be willing to summarize a couple of the key challenges or barriers that were discussed? We talked a little bit about, but I'll bring everyone back together in just a second.
So. At least in the long run, these are really good thoughtful questions. Everybody that you were able to write. What are the long steps that it is knowing that they're not but they're a school in our school. We're creating it's all about it. How we implement a process that create rather than.
So they're able to use that as kind of early warning systems as they see groundwater. Either know that.
Really sorry.
Thinking about building out.
You guys are very neat with it.
I think that'd be a challenge.
Have you guys been here for the full conference?
It is the market.
Yeah.
It's one of the like, big markets.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. Vacation during lunch, so that.
Finding the time, and I now live in that. When I see, so you presented on the pumping process that you're using in India. And that drew me
Also required.
I hadn't paid attention to that.
Because person located under.
And one hand is that you're centralizing, water population, right, so you can.
Like it's nice.
We know.
Yeah.
Dry up. And you might know.
Okay, ding, ding, ding. We'll try to come back together now and just close out all that.
We don't just.
Yeah.
We recharge, when you put water in the ground, same way we take it out, we drill a hole.
All right, we're gonna wrap up here and come back together as a group.
Recharge.
I'm gonna ask that we identify one speaker from each of our breakout groups, just to briefly summarize some of the high level points that were discussed, and then we can kind of close out and head into the coffee break early. So maybe just for starting with state of California and digitized water rights, would someone from the group like to kind of summarize for everyone what was discussed in that breakout session?
Summarize if anybody wants to hop in, feel free. So we really address the complexity of the system and how it's not going to solve all your underlying issues, right? Creating excellent frameworks, really understanding what the flaws of your system could potentially be, what are the risks there, and what are the opportunities of implementing such a system? And does it solve all your problems? And the answer is no, but thoughtful governance around it can definitely help. Anything else you guys want to add? Great.
Hey, can I ask a question? Did you guys talk at all about any like application in the international space at all? Or no, it's perfectly all right.
No, we didn't.
Okay. Thank you.
Over to case study on Horn of Africa.
Yeah, we had many interesting issues come up during our presentation, and the one that I think represents our discussion here is sustainability of using sensors. And sustainability when you think about it from a supply perspective, but also operation. So you have local teams that you're building capacity, for them to be able to sustain that innovation time. And tied to that sustainability is, what economic models are available. In this case, John mentioned, or talked about the climate finance. We're tying climate financing to drive operations and maintenance, but also there are questions about there with the mass balance. And in this case, for the Horn of Africa, how we intervene is by coupling functionality or credits driven from generated from functionality, and also credits generated from improving water quality. And in that case, it's more than we believe can move us forward and move us away from just only limited resources to repair walls and
Thanks, Dennis. And over to the data for climate finance.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of things. MWA in Ethiopia is looking at getting evidence of how climate financing can support what the systems in Ethiopia. And one of the things to realize is the complexity of these methodologies. They are really complex, and if you happen to review them, realize that it requires a lot of rigorous monitoring data, and that can be an initial barrier to accessing climate financing. And we also noted that transparency is a double-edged sword, because now we have options. People can use digital monitoring, report and verification technologies or not, and might just use like some baselines. And so you face the temptation to decide, should I be fully transparent or not? And that can raise criticisms to the methodologies. And one opportunity we also talked about was climate reparations. And the idea that a lot of these communities we're talking about didn't cause climate change. Climate change was caused by high-income countries, and so climate financing being framed also as climate reparations, where financing is steered from high-income countries to these low-income settings to help build their resilience to climate change, because they are often the least prepared for the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Well, without further ado, I think we'll wrap up, and we really thank everyone for their questions, critique, especially on these technologies that we shared during this session today, and a number of points around sustainability, kind of feedback loops, and transparency are key considerations that we'll take with us as we continue work for the next year, and hope to see you next year to give further updates on this work. Thank you.
Well, you know, there's runoff, and you capture the runoff and you put it back in. There's 100 more river water in the ocean right now, and I saw that. Yeah. That's good.
But I don't want to lose.
Not only
Top guy. Specifically, very concerned of wastewater now. Yeah, just, questions. Yeah, exactly. Like, gravity treatment. But it's fun to have like your interactive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was saying that. Yeah, I was.